Welcome to another episode of the Ecom Edge, the first e-commerce podcast focused on how enterprise brands, manufacturers, and teams like yours can be smarter with data, technology, and resources to gain that very important competitive edge. So today's guest is known as the Retail Prophet, as he's one of the world's foremost retail industry futurists who has influenced brands like Walmart, Google, Estee Lauder, BMW, and LVMH. A prolific, extremely prolific author and speaker, he also was named yet again to Rethink Retail's top influencer list. Of course, I'm talking about Doug Stevens. Doug, welcome. How are you today?
I'm very well, Diane. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you on here. And by the way, congratulations for being yet again named as a top influencer.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but I'll take the accolade regardless.
You know, you've written 3 internationally best-selling books, with the most recent being Resurrecting Retail, The Future of Business in a Post-Pandemic World. And you wrote that in 2021. And it was interesting because when I was going through the book, you touched upon all the things that we were going to have to deal with. But did you expect what we've been dealing with in this past year? The fact that the supply chain would, completely fall apart and inflation would go up to almost record highs, and the Fed would continuously raise rates. So, all of the things that have been going on in the last 4 to 5 months really to suggest that there was, this big R word in our horizon.
Well, it's interesting because through my research for the book, it really forced me to look back at the 1918 pandemic. And as much as our world has changed between then and now, to look for what could be some of the patterns of fallout and some of the disruptions that we might expect. And I clearly recall the day that I decided that this book had to be written, I phoned my publisher and I said, I have a feeling this is going to be not just a story in the retail market, but potentially the story in retail for what could be years to come. So I wouldn't say that the disruptions that we have encountered have been a complete surprise, including the recession. Oddly enough, when you look back on the economy in 1918 and 19, it was remarkably resilient in the face of the Spanish flu. And it was only by the time they got to about 2020, 2021 that they started to see a profound decline in economic activity. And I actually asked the question in the book, could we suffer the same fate? Understanding that today we have a lot more economic policy interventions at our fingertips and potentially a lot more data to work with, but could it be that we experience the same sort of 2-year delay in the economic drop? And sure enough, here we are. So it is kind of odd how, in many ways, we are mirroring the fallout from the 1918 pandemic.
But very different. A lot of this inflation was due to the fact that supply chains were interrupted, and there was this just a break in ability to get things. At that time, you had the death of very young people who were in factories. So again, you had a little bit of a supply chain interruption, but here we didn't have so much that. It was at the other end of the scale, from with more elderly impacted. So there's a lot of similarities, which is why you categorized it as not a black swan, right? Because a black swan, in your definition, is something that's so unusual, probably won't happen again. Isn't that how you?
Exactly. Yeah. And there were, there were those that were sort of pointing to COVID as though it were something that had come out of nowhere. And that's not the case. I mean, there have been, people like Bill Gates, for example, who have for decades been predicting that a pandemic much like this one, and potentially even more deadly than this one, would come along. And there were organizations, too, that were preparing for just such an eventuality. Organizations like Intel have had standing committees on pandemics, are ready to go, building plans should such an eventuality take place. So, yeah, not a black swan, not entirely surprising. The duration of the pandemic has been discouraging, if nothing else, and it just seems that just when we think we're kind of out of the woods, something else comes along. So, but it does fortunately look like we've got the worst of it behind us.
So why don't we start then with the future of retail? Why don't we pick up at the end of that book and talk about, it's post-pandemic, post-supply chain issues, post the hiccups of the crazy inflation. It's starting to come down a little bit. We just saw yesterday's report. And shoppers are wanting to shop. They want to shop. I don't know if they're shopping differently. Are they still doing impulse buying? Are they more deliberate in their action? What are you seeing?
So I think that if we sort of pan out and look at the macro, we have to sort of appreciate that 2019 was no bargain for retail either. I mean, we had no shortage of issues. There were a lot of retailers who at that time were showing incredible vulnerability. Shopping centers were in a relative state of decline. There was a profound sense of product proliferation in the market, the expansion of players like Amazon, Alibaba, JD.com in Asia, et cetera. I would say that the chemical makeup of retail then went into the pandemic, and it changed somewhat. Amazon began to lose market share through the pandemic, surprisingly. Alibaba was losing market share. And these were two seemingly unstoppable forces prior to the pandemic. But an interesting thing happened along the way. Global retailers en masse improved dramatically their capabilities in the arena of e-commerce. And consumers, many for the first time, began venturing out online and really discovering firsthand what their online buying options were. For many people, it was the first time that they'd ordered groceries, for example, online and sort of experienced the convenience of that. And so that enormous level of catch-up by the rest of the industry vis-a-vis the Amazons and Alibabas of the world has really forced those companies into a new era of their own evolution. I posit in the book thoughts around Jeff Bezos potentially stepping back as the leader of Amazon, and certainly that transpired with the appointment of Andy Jassy to the role of CEO. In following that appointment, Andy Jassy has really begun to tighten down the bolts at Amazon. They've cut costs. They're really working at efficiency. And my belief is that the reason that that's happening at Amazon is that we're out of the era of growing customer count at Amazon, and we're into the era of becoming potentially the most efficient e-commerce operation in the world from a cost standpoint. And the reason I believe that that's the focus is because Amazon has recognized that if it only remains a marketplace for goods, it will be overtaken. The e-commerce is no longer, frankly, a destination. E-commerce is no longer a website. It's everywhere. It's in every Instagram post, every TikTok video, every YouTube video. There's a commercial component. So the entire atmosphere of retail has changed. I believe Amazon is going to start moving into they already are, but in a far more deliberate way, into categories like healthcare, banking, insurance, education, et cetera, which sort of the next evolution of Amazon as we know it. And consumers have a tremendous amount more options of where to buy things. So back to your question, what does it mean for the future of retail? I think it means that, and this is the case that I try and make in the book, is that every retailer now, if you don't happen to be an Amazon, an Alibaba, or some other huge global marketplace, every retailer should be using this opportunity to really retrench and rethink their value to consumers. Because ultimately, I think what we've really left is the era of subtle brand positioning. There is no such thing anymore. You either have utility and radical value for consumers or you don't. And if you don't, you will be left behind as a brand. And if you do, you are likely to experience great success over the next 10 years. But it's not as simple as, a pen stroke. It's not as simple as simply declaring yourself of value to consumers. You have to really identify what that means, articulate it at every single touch point, and deliver something that is truly unique and memorable.
Our CEO here at Coveo, Louis Tetu, always calls it we live in the experience economy. And I think you believe that as well, that as you're talking about putting forth your value, you're really putting forth value from the perspective of what the customer wants, right? So that means a heightened customer experience. And I know you talk a lot about and write a lot about the metaverse. For people who may not be aware of that as much, can you define the metaverse? I mean, there's been a lot of talk for the last year, but it seems like this sort of nebulous thing. Why don't you wrap it up a little bit?
Sure thing, and I will do that. I just want to go back on one thing you just mentioned about the idea that we live in the age of experiences, and I do believe that, and it's been something that I've been advocating for a long time, and not just me. I mean, if I'm being honest, people like Joseph Pine and James Gilmore, going back to the early 1990s, were suggesting that we've moved out of the era of goods and services, and we're approaching the era of the experience economy, which was the name of the book that they wrote, which is still an incredibly relevant book for people to read. So this is not something that is new. I mean, my goodness, we've been talking about experiences in retail for the better part of 30 years now. And my honest opinion is that while most retailers pay lip service to that idea, most are not manifesting any sort of tangible experience that is either unique or remarkable. Oftentimes efforts to get to that experience are preempted by one bad quarter of sales.
I was just going to say that. I mean, I think the number one thing is people, comes down to, well, did it drive revenue?
Right.
And it's always one of those soft, amorphous. I always say, thank God that they don't have to justify why we need, HVAC. We wouldn't have heat or air conditioning because there's no way to tie it to revenue.
Exactly. And so, yes, there's this level of short-termism in the industry that I think prevents a lot of those well-laid plans from ever, taking fruition. But to your question about the metaverse, so again, the metaverse is also not a new idea. It's something that's been posited in science fiction and in business circles for about 30 years, sort of springboarding off a book called Snow Crash, which was written in 1992, I believe, by an author named Neil Stephenson, in which he portrays this science fiction world of this parallel reality that people can slip in and out of, and experience digital things in the real world and real things in the digital world. I think what happened was that when we all found ourselves sequestered in our homes, and not being able to have the kinds of in real life relationships that we were accustomed to, I think our global imagination sort of flew to this idea of the metaverse and this notion of a parallel reality where many of us might work, entertain ourselves, and of course shop. And in theory, the metaverse is a world that is comprised of many different technologies, be it virtual reality, augmented reality, the idea of using blockchain and cryptocurrency to acquire things within the metaverse. All of these various technologies kind of being cobbled together to create this parallel reality. I think there was a lot of confusion around this because at the same time you had companies like Facebook, which is now Meta, sort of declaring themselves a metaverse company and seemingly putting a hold on the idea that they had created the metaverse, which is certainly not true. There will be no one entity that creates this in the same way that there is no one entity that created the internet. It's really the conglomeration of all of us, businesses, individuals, consumers, creating content and sharing content in this space. The same is true of the metaverse. Now, I think what's interesting to me is that usually these sorts of ideas and technologies take a significant amount of time to reach the public consciousness, to create expectations among users and consumers, and then eventually some of them might die off, or they may go into a new era of their own evolution. This happened incredibly quickly. It was like, within the framework of the pandemic, within the time frame, which maybe a year or two, we couldn't read an article online without hearing about the metaverse or reading about crypto and NFTs and virtual reality, et cetera. So what's interesting is that all of these technologies that we're talking about, be it blockchain, crypto, AR, VR, et cetera, have rapidly moved past the point of inflated consumer expectations and have moved into what Gartner calls the trough of disillusionment, that period of time where we, as users, are sort of scratching our heads and wondering, well, why would I buy an NFT? This is silly, why would I buy crypto when the crypto market has crashed? Why would I be interested in investing in blockchain when blockchain networks now have been hacked and made vulnerable? So we're well into that trough of disillusionment. And for that reason, many of us might say, well, you know what, I guess the metaverse is no longer a thing. But I think it would be a mistake to count it out because, as Gartner points out, just to the other side of the trough of disillusionment is the slope of enlightenment, the place where these startups begin to pivot. Investors become more pragmatic. They look for real solutions within these technologies. And so we may find that where blockchain was closely associated with crypto, today, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, we may have a myriad of applications for blockchain that have nothing to do with cryptocurrency, but become true enterprise level functions. And find enterprise level functionality. We may find that NFTs are not about buying cartoon doodles for thousands of dollars only to see them deflate in their value. We may find that NFTs are really smart contracts that are used for things like consumer warranties.
Yeah, that's exactly where I think it's going to go. More into the loyalty and into the enhancement. What do you get by being part of this association?
Exactly.
So how do retailers prepare for that? And this reminds me a lot of when, because I was head of digital for a company in the 1990s, and it was interactive. They were looking at interactive television, and having come out of technology companies, I was like, there isn't a server fast enough to really deliver interactive television. But as you know, a lot of money went in that direction for a long time, and it was about 25 years before we finally saw something resembling interactive TV. There was a few things on demand, but now, with Netflix, that's what interactive TV, that's what we've got now. We all have 37 apps on our TV set, so we can figure out what it is we're going to watch tonight.
Yeah. Well, and that matter, like the pipeline matters, and that brings up the notion of 5G as well. A lot of the experience of the metaverse will depend on the ability to move data very, very quickly, both up and downstream. One of the most significant holdbacks right now on technologies like virtual reality is that we don't have the ability to push data fast enough to remove the latency that exists within a VR experience. And so you'll often hear people say that they felt sick to their stomach using VR. Well, that's in part because the frame rates just simply aren't fast enough to truly mirror reality. Our brains are a bit thrown off by it.
So if I say VR to you, what do you think are the top 3 or 4 segments in retail that should really be looking at VR today? Are there 3 or 4 that, you should be doing this?
Yeah, well, I actually think the more compelling technology right now for retail is augmented reality as opposed to virtual reality. Um, I don't believe that there are many retailers, frankly, that could not benefit from using augmented reality. The ability for a consumer to be browsing a product online and then within a few seconds be able to take that product virtually and place it in their home, whether it's a new piece of furniture, whether it's a piece of clothing that they'd like to try on, or any other product. So I think there's huge application right now for augmented reality. Virtual reality has a form factor problem, unfortunately, and that we may have to live with for some time. But there are certainly a lot of companies working on trying to reduce the size of the form factor. It's right now, it's just not a very practical technology in the sense that, you literally have to reach over, grab an Oculus headset and put it on in order to have a VR experience. That's not to say that there won't be early adopters who are willing to do that and have the hardware available. But I think in order for it to truly scale, we're going to need something that is much lighter, more practical. I sort of liken it to the days of the first mobile devices that were 3.5 pounds and the length of a loaf of bread. I mean, that was the first Motorola cell phone. Today, these things are feather light and have the computing power of a NASA spacecraft. So we can go a long way in a very short period of time, and I expect that 20 years from now, it will be just a foregone conclusion that everyone engages with virtual reality. But today, I think it's augmented reality is the one that retailers should be experimenting with.
Are there other technologies too that you think that they should be doing today or in the next year or two that will position them or keep them in the game anyway longer while we ride this wave from the trough into enlightenment?
Yeah, I think so. I think blockchain is another technology that can have significant application within the organization. Most particularly, and you mentioned supply chain earlier, most particularly in the area of supply chain. It's actually quite remarkable when you begin scratching, through the veneer of most organizations to find that a remarkable percentage of their processes are manual. A remarkable percentage of their data is incredibly latent. A number of inputs that they have in terms of data into their supply chain analytics are very, very narrow. So blockchain would potentially, if we sort of play it out as a scenario, would potentially, if a brand were able to establish a blockchain relationship with all of their suppliers, all the way down the line, right down to raw materials, it would really give them a new level of real-time insight and validation into the activity that is taking place. It would really give them the ability to share data with their partners in an entirely new way, and I think become far more resilient in their ability to respond to the things that are happening around them, be it geopolitical disruption, environmental impacts and events that are taking place, or the next pandemic. So I see wide application for blockchain technology.
Interesting. Digital twins and digital printers. That the ability to get this blueprint, if you will, digital blueprint, and be able to print it, 3D print. Do you see that? I mean, there was always great promise about that as well, and now it seems to have gone by the wayside a little bit.
Yeah, well, and it's sort of two different things, right? Digital twinning is the idea that you will at some point, and some organizations are already embarking on this, be able to create literally a digital copy of your organization. So a digital representation of every moving part within your business, all the way between raw materials and the consumer, and that with that capacity, that you would then be able to throw scenarios at that digital twin. So be able to say, what if we were to encounter a 2 month shortage of component parts for the things that we manufacture? How would that affect our business? And be able to see the actual inputs and potentially get some automated recommendations on what to do about it, in advance of it happening. So digital twinning, I think, is something that we're absolutely going to see. And as I said, there are a lot of technology companies right now that are working on building those capacities for organizations. In terms of 3D printing, it was interesting when 3D printing first came about. Even I said, I can conceive that at some point we will be able to print our own parts for things at home. We'll be printing toys for our children. We'll be, printing household items. The truth is, it's just simply not scalable at this point for the consumer. The things that are made are relatively crude. And they're expensive to make. So the notion that we were going to print things much more cost effectively at home than going to the store and buying them, that hasn't transpired yet. But where 3D printing really has found a value and a position is in manufacturing. Manufacturers are now using 3D printing to vastly cut the cost of things like die making, prototyping. They're able to come to market much more quickly with products now because they can create these prototypes at a very cost-effective and scalable level. So I think there will still be a consumer application for this at some point, but it may be that it's several more years or potentially decades before we get there.
Well, we live in the world of personalization and recommendations, being able to use first and zero party data in order to better suggest the next best action or the next best product for people. Again, is this an area that you see continuing? It's obviously been growing, but not as fast as I might anticipate that it would have. We do a lot of surveys, and retailers are still struggling. And a lot of times they're struggling because of the idea that they're going to lose control over the promotional aspect of it. That they're going to be told by the AI that this is what you have to push, instead of, we're going to be able to have control over the machine.
Mm-hmm. I said in 2017 in my book Reengineering Retail that we had moved out of the era where people search for products, and we'd moved into the age where products begin searching for people. And I think that's where we're at. To be fair, none of us like getting unwanted promotional messages. None of us appreciate being spammed. But I think we can all admit that the recommendations that are being provided to us by whether it's Amazon or other companies, they really are getting rather remarkable in their ability to kind of triangulate our interests, our needs, and potentially products that will be, that will fit within that. I expect that this is only going to continue, but one of the major barriers, I would say, because on the other hand, sometimes I'm quite surprised that Amazon really doesn't have a better knowledge of who I am as a consumer, but a part of that is that I think there's still this awkward dance going on between brands and consumers where there's not necessarily an overt exchange going on. And what I mean by that is brands offer us, brands will say, sign up for our loyalty program today, and you'll get the following benefits. And really, all we get in many cases, we get a lot more communication from them, right? To the point
Wanted or
where,
not, right?
right, and wanted or not, and oftentimes we'll end up unsubscribing only a few days later, once the fire hose of spam starts. Um, and consumers oftentimes will sign up for things, but they'll give a brand. I know so many people that have, like they have their real email address, and then they have the one that they give to marketing companies that they rarely ever check the inbox of. So what I've advocated to our clients is we have to move into a new period where there's a more overt and honest exchange of information. And for a brand to say to a consumer, look, we have two kinds of experiences here. We have the experience we give to everyone, which is great, but we also have this next level of experience, which we only give to those people who really want it, who appreciate our products and our brand and want to have a closer relationship with us. And we can really tailor an experience to your needs, your preferences, your individuality. But in order to do that, we just need a few pieces of information. And to be honest about what that information is. I think part of why we're so reticent to sign up for things is because we always fear that we're signing up for things that we don't understand, and that we're giving away a lot more data maybe than we intended to. We have to get beyond that. And I think it starts by a brand not asking consumers for their data, but rather offering them something of value to begin with, offering them an experience that has real, true value and working back to, and here's what we need from you. And to be honest, membership is really the easiest way to get to that point. If you look at a brand like Costco, for example, we're all, more than happy to, pick up our Costco cards and hit the store as members because we paid to be members.
Well, it's funny you use a membership really connotes community. And if you're really thinking in terms of the metaverse down the road in whatever capacity exists, it sounds to me like you're saying start laying the groundwork today of how can you build a community of people who are going to benefit from the values you're offering. Is that pretty much a good summation?
Yeah, it is, because the truth is, from my standpoint, that everybody has a loyalty program today, but it's proven that loyalty programs, apart from commodity things like maybe gas stations, airlines, hotels, where the difference between brands is sometimes severely nuanced. Outside of those areas, loyalty programs really don't generate much loyalty, and it's just proven. The average American belongs to 18 different loyalty programs. Most people don't even understand how to redeem their points, much less redeem them on a regular basis. And 40% of consumers who belong to a loyalty program say they don't even they weren't even aware that they were part of that program. So loyalty can be very ineffective. Membership is where the rubber hits the road. Membership is a company saying, look, give us $100 and we will give you something of value in return. And it sort of keeps everybody honest. And because the consumer has paid to be part of this program now, sure, they want to share data. Sure, they want the experience to become more and more customized and personalized to them because they're paying for it. So I think that if you really want a consumer's data and you really think you have something to offer them for it, then charge them for it. Charge them to belong to your brand as a member and see what happens. Companies like Restoration Hardware have had massive success with their $100 a year, or might be a bit more than that now, membership program that gives very specific benefits to members who seem to have no objection to paying for them.
This has been terrific. There were so many other questions I wanted to ask. I certainly hope I can have you come back because I want to really get into it with you about Generation Z and this new cohort coming up. And we're running long on time here, and I want to be respectful of your time. So would you come back and chat with us again and talk about Generation Z?
You bet, Diane.
All right. That sounds awesome. Doug, it's been really terrific having you on. And to our listeners, thank you for joining. And remember to rate and subscribe to the Ecom Edge on your favorite podcast streaming platform. Bye, everyone.